Hi everyone, this is Emily. Welcome back to my homestead and to week 8 of the 2025 Three Rivers Challenge. This is a pantry challenge where the goal is to not go to the grocery store for the months of January and February and to just use the food stored up in our home. And for our family, the only thing we are going to purchase at the store during this challenge is milk. I'm starting out the week by making some bulk mixes that just make our lives a little bit easier and more convenient. And the first thing I'm making is a pancake mix. I started making our own pancake mix instead of a box mix from the store when I found out that I can't have corn and barley, and started reading a lot more ingredients lists, really on everything that I buy, even stuff that I buy regularly. Occasionally ingredients will change, and pancake mix was one of those things. The box we currently had was totally fine, and then the next box that I went to buy, they'd changed the ingredients and added barley to it. So I had to find a mix recipe somewhere to make pancake mix at home, because this is one of my middle child's favorite snacks. They regularly ask for this for an after school snack, and I'm happy to make them for them, but I needed a new mix to use so that I could occasionally have pancakes as well. So this mix calls for 9 cups flour, 6 tablespoons of baking powder, 1 cup of sugar, and 3 teaspoons of salt. This is a scaled up recipe from the original recipe that I found so that it will make a bulk amount. This fits in a container that's about the size of a cereal box, and I believe that is what that container was advertised as being for when I purchased it. It's been many, many years that I've had this container. And once all of that gets mixed together to actually make pancakes, you take 1.5 cups of the mix, 1 cup of milk, 1 egg, and 2 tablespoons of oil. Mix that up and you are ready to pop these on your griddle. Here I am actually making a double batch because everybody wanted pancakes this morning. A single batch makes about 12 pancakes, and that's not enough for all of us to eat at one time. And I think we actually ended up with a few extra pancakes that popped in the fridge, and they reheat pretty well. While my griddle is heating up, I go ahead and get out that container I was talking about. And yes, it is dirty, I guess you would say. Not so much dirty, but coated in residual pancake mix from the previous batch, which we just emptied. I don't have any problem reusing this container without washing it first, because these ingredients are all, from the same packages of flour and baking powder, etc., and are far from expiring. Now, do most of you need to watch me make pancakes? No, probably not. But there is a particular person in mind who sent me a picture of their attempt at making pancakes, which was a failure. And so this is for that person. I like to use a griddle and put a little bit of oil on it and spread that around. It needs to be nice and hot when you put your pancakes on, and I usually use a ladle, a small ladle. This is a gravy ladle that I'm using. The main things are making sure that the griddle is hot and then waiting for the right time to flip your pancakes. So you can see there are popped bubbles that are not filling back in. And here is another close up. You can see there's bubbles there, and the edges are getting just a little bit dry. And once the bubbles pop and aren't just closing back up immediately, that means they are ready to flip. So hopefully this visual tip video will help that person make some great pancakes in the future. Now, some of us wanted some chocolate chip pancakes, so I am adding some chocolate chips to part of the batter after I made the plain pancakes. Just mix them up, and then the same thing. goes with these. It is actually a little bit harder to tell when they are ready to flip because you don't get quite so many bubbles visible when you are making pancakes with a mix in. But once you have a regular pancake down, adding a mix in doesn't make it any more difficult once you have figured out when the right time to flip your pancakes is. When I was finished with the pancakes, I started making a loaf of rye bread in my bread machine, just using the recipe book that came with the bread machine. I kind of lost my mind this morning, or thought I was losing my mind. I could not find my rye flour. I usually put specialty flours in my freezer because I don't use them nearly as often as the all-purpose flour, but it was not in the freezer. All I could find was whole wheat, and I've made this recipe before, and I was just very confused as to why I could not find this flour. I did eventually find it in the cabinet where I keep my baking powder and baking soda and things like that. But man, I looked for this flour for a good 20 minutes and had just about convinced myself that I had made the rye flour with whole wheat flour, not realizing it. Thankfully, I found it. I did put it into the freezer this time when I was finished. But we are making this rye bread because later in the week we are going to have Reubens. I had some corned beef lunch meat and some Swiss cheese in the fridge since before the pantry challenge started, and have been meaning to make this for quite some time. Next up is oatmeal packets. I've got all of these reusable bags, and I'm going to make some homemade oatmeal packets. Instead of purchasing them from the store, we just make our own. And as I've used a few of these since making this video, I realized I made them wrong. I'm putting an entire cup of oats in these bags, and I was only supposed to put a half cup of oats in these bags. I've done this many times, and for some reason I just did it wrong today. So we do have to add a little extra milk when making these, and then if my youngest is eating it, I have to give her half of a packet instead of the whole packet. But I have found that instead of just making an individual serving whenever somebody wants it, it is convenient to use these little bags that we've got. I wasn't really using this size for much of anything anyway. I was using more of the larger sizes or the sandwich sizes. So these more snack size is the perfect size for a regular serving of this instead of this enormous serving that I'm making. These were actually a little difficult to close up, and I was confused as to why, but now that I've realized I put twice as many oats as I was supposed to in each bag, makes total sense why they were hard to close. But what you would normally do is put half a cup of oats per bag. I add a quarter cup of dried cranberries, a tablespoon of flaxseed, and a pinch of salt to each container. I used to add a tablespoon of sugar, but then everybody seemed to have different tastes when it came to how much sugar to use. So I just leave that out now, and everybody adds some sugar or maple syrup if they want some more sugar. I lean on the side of not needing as much sugar, and then the kids, of course, would prefer it sweeter. When we prepare this, we put a packet into a bowl with a cup of milk and microwave it for a couple of minutes. You could also pour boiling water over the top of it instead, and I ended up getting, I think, 12 packets this day. I think we have 13 of these bags total, but one of them had been grabbed to use for something else. And same as with the pancake mix container, we do not always wash these bags between refilling them because the contents are still good. The last mix I am making today is a hot cocoa mix. Similar to the pancake mix, I cannot purchase a hot cocoa mix at the store that has ingredients that I can consume. Everyone that I have seen has corn syrup solids in it. So I found a recipe online and then modified it to suit my tastes, and now I make my own. Actually, probably way cheaper. I haven't done the actual math, but I'm pretty sure it's way cheaper. And many recipes online call for powdered sugar, which is way more expensive than granulated sugar. So my recipe is 2 2/3 cups granulated sugar, 1 1/3 cup cocoa powder, which I always put through a sifter, 1 cup powdered milk, and 1 teaspoon of salt. I get this all mixed up, and then this will fit into a container that I have that has a mark on it that says 30 ounces, but this fills up past that line. It's probably closer to 34 or 36 ounces. And then to make a cup of hot cocoa with this, I prefer to heat up a cup of milk and then add 2 tablespoons of the powder. But you could alternately put 2 tablespoons into a mug and then pour hot water over the top. At any rate, it's 2 tablespoons of the mix per 8-ounce cup of hot liquid, and it is delicious. Now on to dinner for that evening. I am cutting up a sweet dumpling squash. This is another squash that I purchased at the store because I have seeds and I want to see what it tastes like. And this is even sweeter than the delicata squash. I took a suggestion from a viewer who commented that she likes to slice up her squash and bake it in slices. So I looked up a recipe and decided to try that with this. It was really good. I think it would really suit like an acorn or butternut squash since they're not as sweet, but it was definitely still really good. And I'm not sure how much the kids enjoyed it, but I thought it was amazing and I'm definitely going to make it again. So I'm starting out by cutting it in half, scooping out the seeds, and then I decide to slice it along the indentations around the squash. And it was a little challenging to cut it this way, but I thought it looked really neat. And we do cook this with the skin on. That makes this pretty simple and actually, fairly easy to eat. It's definitely a finger food in my opinion in this application. We kind of ate it how you would maybe a piece of watermelon with the rind still on, but I get this in a bowl, toss it with olive oil, then add kosher salt, basil, oregano, thyme, Parmesan cheese, and garlic powder, and give it a good toss. In retrospect, I should have maybe tossed it in the olive oil and then added the spices and tossed it in the spices. I guess herbs, it's mostly herbs, because it didn't really stick very well. So in the end, I end up recoating them, pulling them back in and recoating them, and then just smushing as much of the Parmesan cheese and herb mixture on it as I can just to use it up. And once they're all coated, my youngest pops them in the oven. Meanwhile, I'm going to make potato salad. So I've got some hard-boiled eggs that I made earlier, and I'm getting those peeled, chopped up, and added to a bowl. The best way to make farm fresh eggs into hard-boiled eggs is really a steaming method. You put about a half an inch of water in the bottom of a pan, put it on to come to a boil over, I think, medium-high heat without the eggs in it. Once the water comes to a boil, you carefully put the eggs in. I usually use a large spoon so that I don't crack them while I'm putting them in. You put the lid on and you let it go for 17 minutes and then transfer it to cold water to cool them down quickly. And they peel beautifully. They don't rip up and have chunks coming off. And that is how I make my hard-boiled egg. In that pot behind me on the stove is the rest of our russet potatoes that I diced up, and they are boiling for the potato salad. And once they're finished cooking, they will also be cooled off in cold water to make them ready for the potato salad, because you don't want hot potatoes or hot eggs mixing with your mayonnaise. That is not going to make a good potato salad. The next thing is to mince up some onion. I'm going to do about half of this onion, and I'm going to cut it very small because you don't want a big chunk of onion either. because this is going to go in raw. Then I add the onion to the bowl with the eggs, as well as the cooled potatoes, salt, yellow mustard, sweet pickle relish, and some mayonnaise. And then we get this all mixed together, and that is the potato salad finished. And here's the sweet dumpling squash served with some leftover chicken and potato salad for a delicious meal this Sunday evening. Now to the bread that I made earlier today. It's finally cooled completely. It's rye bread. Could have risen a little bit more, but that's okay. I'm actually going to cut it in half, turn one side up on its end, and cut the slices lengthwise, I suppose, just to make larger slices of bread for our Reuben sandwiches later this week. I go ahead and let my youngest cut up the other half of the loaf because she wanted to try cutting the bread, and she and the middle child don't really care for Reubens too much, and so they're going to actually have smaller pieces of bread, smaller slices, and she's just going to cut it the normal way you would cut bread. But she has a whole lot of trouble doing it. It was pretty comical, and so she definitely needs more practice cutting bread. So we'll have to have her help more often with this.
Her attempts, my attempts.
Monday was a very busy day, and I didn't have a lot of energy or time, so we did a quick spaghetti with pasta sauce and broccoli. Tuesday is what we wanted to have Monday, but the chicken wasn't quite thawed out enough, so I parted it out into breast, which I cut in half, and then the thighs, the legs, the wings, the chicken tenders, the back and chest, and we are going to have fried chicken. So I'm using my saved deep fry oil and going to get this into the pan and heating up. I use my cast iron skillet when I make fried chicken. Next, I've got 2 shallow bowls, and in one bowl goes the breading mixture, which is going to be flour, the last of the parsley we have in the house, black pepper, and salt. I also go ahead and salt the chicken breast, paprika, and some garlic powder. In the other bowl, I will put a couple of eggs and a little bit of water. The youngest child and I get those both mixed up, and then we can start breading the chicken. Each piece will go into the egg mixture, then into the flour mixture, and then back into the egg mixture, and then back into the flour mixture, just to double coat them, making sure they've got lots of breading on them, enough that it won't just wash away when we put it into the oil. And we repeat this process for all 4 chicken breast halves. The youngest had requested this meal, and she wanted to help make it, and here we are peeling potatoes to make some mashed potatoes. I normally wouldn't peel red potatoes. I don't usually make mashed potatoes with them because we like to eat them with the peels on, but these were the last potatoes available in the house. I actually forgot we even had them until my kid was like, "No, look, we have these," and pulled them out from where they were sitting in the fruit basket. And I was like, oh, great. So we made mashed potatoes to go with our fried chicken. And here we are peeling them. She wanted to chop them up. And then they get into the pot of boiling water that's on the stove. And by the time we get this done, the oil is heated up for our fried chicken. So while I add the chicken into the oil, she adds the potatoes into the water. And we were both getting splashed. Thankfully hers was just water. And I put a splatter screen over the chicken and add some salt to the potato water. After the chicken had browned on one side, I flipped them all over and so they can brown on the second side. And this is where my fried chicken may differ from your fried chicken. Do not come at me because this is how my family does it. That is how they've always done it, and it's the right way to do fried chicken in my book because this is how we like it. So at this point, when they're brown on both sides, I put on a lid and then I stick it in the oven at 325 degrees for about 20 minutes, and that usually gets the chicken all the way done. I do temp the chicken when the timer goes off just to make sure, and one of the pieces was a little bit larger and needed to go in for just a couple more minutes. While the chicken's in the oven, it is time to finish off the mashed potatoes. We add a stick of butter, and I let my youngest use a potato masher on it while I add in some salt and some garlic powder and get out the hand mixer. Then we add a little bit of milk. I take over mashing it, and then we move on to the hand mixer. You don't want to use a hand mixer the whole time to get creamy potatoes. You want to do it once it's to the flavor that you want, and then you just use the hand mixer right at the very end to get it nice and creamy. Otherwise, they'll get kind of gluey and just way too stiff. I usually add a little bit of sour cream to our mashed potatoes as well, but we don't have any at the moment, and they still turned out tasting pretty good. And here is our finished fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and I made some green beans to go on the side. On Wednesday, I'm pulling out some homemade barbecue sauce that I had in the back of the fridge. We don't have enough for what I want to do tonight, so I'm going to try to make some more, but I do not remember what I put in it, so I'm kind of winging it here. I was kind of winging it when I made it the first time, but it was really good. So, what all did I add in there? Ketchup, Worcestershire sauce, molasses, brown sugar, garlic powder, onion powder, vinegar. I get that all mixed up, and it really just didn't taste right, so I added a little bit more of a couple of things, and I never did get it tasting the way that I wanted it to, and I think the missing ingredient was pineapple juice. I'm pretty sure I used pineapple juice the last time I made this because I was trying to make it after a Hawaiian barbecue sauce that I like. Of course, that has corn syrup in it or cornstarch, one of the two, and so I don't use that anymore. So that is why I'm making my own. But it did end up being decent enough, and we didn't need to use a lot of this, so maybe I can buy some pineapple juice when the pantry challenge is over and add it to what's left in this in the fridge. But we are making barbecue chicken tonight. Not technically barbecue because it's not on the barbecue grill, but that's close enough for me. So I'm getting out the legs and thighs and wings from the chicken that I broke down yesterday for the fried chicken, and then I am using the rest of the old barbecue sauce I had to baste both sides of these, getting them as well coated as I can, and then these will go into the oven to start baking. When they're about halfway finished, I pull them out and I use the new barbecue sauce to add another layer of sauce onto these. I'm spooning it on, being careful not to touch the chicken so that I don't contaminate this bowl because I want to save the rest of it in the fridge for future use. So once I get this spooned over the top, then I'll use the basting brush to spread it out, and these will get popped back in the oven until they reach the proper temperature. The barbecue chicken was served with green beans and some homemade biscuits. I made these same biscuits at the beginning of January during this challenge, so I didn't need to show you again. And Thursday, we are finally getting around to using this rye bread that I made to make our Reubens. So I start out with buttering the bread on both sides. That will be the outside of the sandwich. I have my griddle and my cast iron skillet heating up on the stove behind me to get ready for the step that's after this, which would be adding sauerkraut to the cast iron skillet. I add about as much as I think that we're going to need for this meal. The middle and youngest children do not like sauerkraut on their sandwiches, so they're not going to have true Reubens. So I'm only adding enough sauerkraut for myself and the oldest child. Then I grab the bread and get it on the griddle. I only have enough space for 2 sandwiches worth, at this time, and I'm going ahead and making the younger two sandwiches first to give the sauerkraut a little bit more time to cook up. I start adding packages of this thin sliced corned beef lunch meat into the skillet so that it can heat up, and then I go ahead and add the cheese to one of the sandwiches. The middle child only wants bread and meat, and the youngest child wants bread, meat, and cheddar cheese, not the Swiss cheese that is typical of a Reuben. So their sandwiches are finished, and I can get started on the next sandwiches. If you recall, I cut some of the bread into larger sizes so that we could have bigger sandwiches because the oldest and I really like Reubens. And I only have room for 3 of the 4 slices on the griddle this time. So I do end up turning on that little cast iron skillet that, I had made eggs in it that morning for breakfast, and I just threw that 4 slice of bread in there so that the sandwiches could all be done at about the same time. Once I get the next round of corned beef in the skillet, I go ahead and add the Swiss cheese to the bread, add on the Thousand Island dressing, and then once the meat is cooked, I will add that in as well. I had half of a package left because on the youngest sandwich, I only put half a package. So I go ahead and grill up the rest of that meat so we don't have an open package just sitting around. And here's what everything is looking like in process. I go ahead and get the rest of the meat split up between the sandwiches, and then add the sauerkraut. Close those sandwiches up, and they are ready to eat. And here is the finished product, all plated up for everyone to have for dinner. And they are a messy, delicious, wonderful sandwich for dinner. Friday night, I'm starting out with getting some jalapeno poppers on a baking sheet to go in the oven. These are jalapeno poppers that I previously stuffed, wrapped with bacon, and froze back in the fall so that we could have them whenever we want, and it's really convenient and delicious to have these. So once I get these in the oven, I start on our next side dish, which is going to be refried beans. This is our last can of pinto beans in the basement, and I get this into a pot and add in my desired spices. Those include cayenne pepper, onion powder, garlic powder, chili powder, cumin, black pepper, and salt. And then I use a potato masher to start mashing these up. I decide that's not doing the job as well as I'd like, so I grab out my immersion blender and use that. I don't want it to get completely smooth. I do like to have some chunks left in it, but the immersion blender gets it to the consistency that I want. And then I pop this on the stove, and I'm going to let this come to a simmer and then simmer down until it becomes the consistency that we're looking for. In my cast iron skillet, I get some olive oil heating up, and then I will add some frozen sliced onions and bell peppers. While those are cooking down, I open up a jar of home canned chicken and drain off the liquid that I can save to use for something else later. And once the peppers and onions have cooked down to the consistency I'm looking for, I add the canned chicken, and then I will season this all. I use the same spices that I used in the refried beans, as well as some freshly pressed garlic through this garlic press. And then this just needs to get heated through. And here is our completed meal, including some tortillas that I had in the freezer and some shredded cheddar cheese to top our fajitas. Saturday and our final meal of the week. I'm getting out our final package of kielbasa that was in the freezer, and I'm going to get this chopped up into bite-sized pieces. This will get thrown in a pot to start browning. I just shake the pot around a little bit every once in a while to rotate them so they brown on all sides. And then I get our leftover sweet dumpling squash from earlier this week back on a baking sheet to reheat in the oven. And I open up a couple jars of home canned green beans as a side dish. We ate a lot of green beans this week. We were just on a green bean kick, I guess. But we're also running low on other types of vegetables that we have in the house. Once I feel that the kielbasa has browned enough, then I go ahead and add some sauerkraut. This is leftover sauerkraut from when we had Reubens earlier this week, and this is a fantastic way to use it up. Again, a couple of my kids don't care for the sauerkraut, but they can pick the sausage out. That's what I did when I was a kid. I didn't like sauerkraut when I was a kid, but I like it as an adult. It's one of those acquired tastes or more mature taste, possibly. But I always enjoyed the sausage out of this dish when I was a kid, even when I didn't want to eat the sauerkraut that went with it. I just let this simmer for a little while and let all the flavors meld together, and then we are ready to eat dinner. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Thank you for coming along with us. We have one more week of this pantry challenge coming up, and I can't wait to see you in that video. Bye.